It's a great pleasure to have you here, and I must say that as always happens, every time we have a guest, we have a summary of their accomplishments, and of all the ones that I have come across, this one has been actually almost impossible to put together. The summary was just not summarizing enough. So then, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Mrs. Kirloskar to actually introduce herself. But before I do that, I would also like to say that she has worked for many years in a whole range of areas, advertising, in social work, upliftment of people, in running a firm, running firms, enabling joint ventures, enabling industry associations' ability to deal with Japanese and other international investors, and so on. She's also been worked with in her social work efforts. She's worked with children, worked with underprivileged women, worked with children of sex workers, and so she has a very, very wide range of activities and objectives as well that must be driving these. So welcome again.
Thank you.
And so again, as I said, it would be better if you introduce yourself.
Myself.
Thank you.
Yes.
The most important of all.
Most important, most recent and most important endorsement of what I do.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Lavish. And it was so nice to meet you. I'm so privileged, really. I've been wanting to meet with you ever since I came on the board. So I'd like to thank, I'd like to thank CSEP for inviting me here and giving me an opportunity of engaging with some brilliant young minds, not something that I have the opportunity or the possibility to do in my daily life. When I walked into the office, I got reminded of my advertising days. You know, there was a little informality. There were these young people running around. I got a very strong smell of coffee, which was so typical, and I felt completely at home. Otherwise, a fireside chat by its very title and definition seems to be something that you're going to be burning on for 2 hours, right? Okay, let me just, yes, it's sometimes hard for anyone to summarize my biodata because it's not a very typical linear, single line thought flow. It's not very logical. And that's how I've lived and functioned all my life. To begin with, I was an advertising professional, and when I got married, I had just completed training at a DMBNB in London. And I'm, of course, a commerce and accounts graduate, but I wanted to be in advertising and marketing. And marriage also gave me an opportunity because thereafter they had their own advertising company in the Kirloskar group. And my grandfather-in-law, my talk you will find is a little different from the professionals who come here because I come from a family-owned business background, but my family itself was more in government, diplomacy, and politics, and professionals. So I had the best of both in terms of my upbringing and later my marriage. So my husband's grandfather, the late Mr. S.L. Kirloskar, he was an entrepreneur by his nature and his character. And he said, we have a small advertising company. You start working in it. We have a CEO, work your way up. And you've already trained abroad, so you have a little background of how it is. And you start working on it, and eventually I want you to build it and transform it from an industrial advertising agency to a consumer company, so that we are competitive with the finest over the next 5-8 years, because you could envision that is where the free economy would go eventually. So that's what I did. I worked my way up there, and the family was very strict. You know how some of these families are. They're very strict because they just constantly want to impress the frugality of the situation on you, and they ask you to be very lean and they ask you to work very hard. So I had to do that while I had to also balance a huge joint family that I had been married into. I came from a very nuclear independent setup, and I was married into a family where close family dinner was 72 people at any point in time, okay? And you couldn't tell them that Bajaj Auto has just finished a campaign, and you know how it is. In research, it's very similar to advertising, right? You're engaged in thought, you're discussing something, you may forget a meal, or you may forget to be in time for the movie because you're really deep into the analysis, and that excites you. You feel that research scholars are not using their EQ, they're not using left and right brain appropriately balanced, but I don't think so. I think the emotion lies in the commitment that you have to the idea, right? You have an idea and you're trying to develop that idea, you're trying to merge logic with it, you're trying to have statistical analysis to it, And in that there is a lot of intensity, otherwise you can't really be a research scholar. So you are committed, the idea process is what gives you, and the validation of the idea process is what gives you the emotion. So that's your part of the emotional, what you bring to the table, right? So there, sometimes you do miss out on timetables, but it was very hard for me. I had to be back in time, especially in the first few years. So it was a challenge, but life is always, every one of us in this room has had different challenges. My challenge doesn't make it bigger or better than yours, it's just different. So with those challenges, I grew in the business. And at one point, after 12 years, I had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Prem Mehta of Lintas. And Lintas was on an acquisition spree, because that was the time, 20 years ago, when in the 1983, so I think in the 90s, in the end 90s, the world was merging. All the advertising agencies were merging into being part of large financial networks. They were getting eaten up by these financial networks, and each one would be part of a network, and then they'd have some synergies. So they'd have common finance and HR, and they try and save cost, etc., to make it more cost efficient, the whole the advertising model. So that is when I spoke to Lintas, and they approached me, and they said, we'll do a joint venture to begin with, 50-50. And they appointed me as the president and CEO, reporting into New York directly. So that was very nice for me, because I suddenly in 1998, I became a professional CEO and president. And those years that followed were the largest training. It was a very good training for me on how to function and work as a professional, where you're working for an organized global institution that has its own norms, that has its own parameters of functioning, and we all know what being a professional means. And we have to work very hard. I think finance management, I learned very well with them. I learned on SOP setting, I learned on structuring management. That was very good. You know, entrepreneurial energy is good, but they said your business should work on the processes. They have to be very strong. I learned HR, I learned all the functions really hands-on in those 12 years. My chairman, Mr. Mehta, was outstanding. He personally guided me, so I was very lucky to have the best advertising leader really as my immediate boss for a period of 10, 12 years after that. In that period, it was very important for me to gain more knowledge through certain other aspects of my work. You know, when you're working in advertising, marketing, communications, what are you really dealing with? You're trying to understand and get a fix on the key consumer insight. That key consumer insight comes through qualitative research, it comes through the quantified research, statistical analysis, and finally you arrive at that one insight that your communication for the brand has to target. And then you look at a positioning for the brand, etc. So I said, you know, how do I improve my ability to arrive at the key consumer insight? That is when I acted in 1 or 2 films that really helped me. Communication, understanding, environment, very, very interesting for me. And then the other thing that really helped me, and I enjoyed thoroughly, because I'm a communication person otherwise as well, was I hosted a TV show of 38 episodes for Times Now, when Times Now started. So it's a little after your time, before your time, sorry. You must have been too young to watch those sort of shows at that time. You had other things to do, I'm sure. And in any case, our television ratings and viewership is dominated by 2 things, cinema and cricket, as we know. So this was an experiment, but it did very well. And it ran for almost 1.5 years on prime time on Saturday and Sunday. And it was repeated during the week by popular demand during the afternoon slots. So it did well. It was basically an Oprah Winfrey show where we had different subjects for each episode. It was a 360-degree set, a reality show with real people speaking on that subject about their life. So what you had to do is you had to research that person's life and what is the problem, and then you had to talk to them and bring it out. Because you see, 18, 16 years back, people in India are not used to sharing in a public platform their innermost secrets or their intimate details or their mindset. You know, it is all about what will society think, what is the right optic. It's like that Pirandello's mask. You know, everybody is following that form of theatre here in our real life. That's the way our society works. So it's not as easy as Oprah Winfrey. So it was a challenge. I was trained heavily. I had to study a lot on the profile, get into the mind of the person. But what it enabled me to do is it allowed and enabled me to develop an instinct for understanding individuals better in the context of their surroundings. And that really helped me when I sat on brainstorming sessions with the researchers and with my account planning team and with my creative team on how do I arrive at that key consumer insight which I need to identify, articulate, and then target through my communication. So that helps. You know, sometimes when you're doing a particular job, a particular line of work in a particular subject, it helps to develop your skills around some related areas. It just gives you the strength to, makes you stronger and more competent in your core area. So that is why those basket of things, if you study, it falls in line with what I was doing at that period of time. That was a long phase of my life, almost I think 18, 20 years. Then I took a break for 2 years, and my husband and I decided, and thankfully, I'm so glad that destiny or my, my mind or the situation drove us into that decision, because I didn't know that 12, 14 years after I'm going to be hit with a massive crisis, massive blow from the dark. And to be able to deal with that crisis, I needed to have taken that decision, which was to come back and work in the holding company, Kirloskar Systems, with Vikram, and help him and work with him on the India-Japan partnership, specifically the Toyota-Kirloskar partnerships. Because by then, 15 years back, he was already midway in setting up several JVs. The joke was every time Vikram goes to Japan, he comes back with a joint venture. And that's very hard with the Japanese. It takes a lifetime to do it, and then it takes 5 minutes, it breaks. It's not so easy. You have to sustain it. So that was a time when he was getting very pressured. 1, 2nd, 3rd JV was happening, and I said, I will handle the holding company, and I will structure it with all the professional experience and exposure that I now have had by working with the Interpublic Group worldwide. And then I did 2, 3 smaller joint ventures with the Toyota Group. One was the Toyota Tsusho Insurance Brokerage, which was way back 2008. That is when we did the first non-automobile joint venture with the Toyota Group. That was the first joint venture we did, which was non-auto. It was auto in a sense. It is one of their arms, part of their trading company, Toyota Tsusho Corporation in Japan, that is in the business of insurance brokerage. It is not insurance, it's only brokerage. And they wanted to introduce that company into India as a separate subsidiary, as a separate company in joint venture with Kirloskar. If we had said no, because Vikram didn't have the time to engage on smaller joint ventures, we would have lost it. And what is the disadvantage in a partnership like that? You do not allow even a little JV to go out of your group. Because once they step out, then they'll have 2 options at all times. You don't want to give them that option. So I took that responsibility, and I said, I will work on this. Parallelly, of course, at that time I was still in advertising. I was extricating slowly, but I started working on this joint venture, and we set it up in 2008, but I think it went functional only in about 2010, 2011 as an independent company. It started as a division of Toyota Tsusho, all that. So as a separate company, it took a few years for it. Today, of course, it's doing extremely well, and I'm the chairman of that company. I decided to retain my position there and not hand it over to the next generation just as yet. So I did that, and then Toyota Tsusho has a healthcare vertical. So that's why he said it's all confusing. But it actually isn't, because it follows a certain thought. They said that, we are very keen, so how do we set up a hospital in India? Because we want to enter non-automotive, as Toyota Tsusho Corporation is the trading company part of the Toyota Group. And they wanted to step out of only automotive and automotive related, and they have set up 2 verticals, food processing and healthcare. Food processing, they're doing a lot of research and work on their own, we're not involved. But on the healthcare, when they spoke about a hospital and then getting into a chain of hospitals, I said, fine. The thing I realized very early is that you can transfer certain thought, way of working, a certain structure and approach from one industry to another. You can do cross-industry. So you may not have domain knowledge of the new industry, but the approach, and that is why Japanese are very, very good in that. The guy who heads marketing for Toyota in India is a guy who's a PhD in Arabic. He's not an MBA, and he's not a marketing person. Because what they do is they say, how do you think through a problem? How do you arrive at a solution? Then the processes and SOPs and systems of the organization are so strong that they will automatically integrate your structure and way of thinking and take it to its logical conclusion. And of course, then there will be experts with domain knowledge, but that's part of the SOP. It's not necessary that every member of that department has to be an expert in that domain knowledge. Now, that's a very unique way of working, but for that, you need very strong structures, and you need to hire the right people, because you're hiring them without domain knowledge. So they really have to be very good in their thought process. So I was able to work. I had a skill of always getting the right people. That was very important. And as an entrepreneur, as a person who's worked in a professional setup after that, How do you get the right people? How do you write out the criteria? Then how do you bring in those people based on the criteria? How do you attach weightages to each criteria? Now these are simple processes, right? You can follow them for any business. So having done that, I did that, and then I sat with a very close family friend who was a doctor, a neurosurgeon in Bangalore, and together we tried to develop a basic model, and we did a project study along with a research organization. They had hired an international company through their agency called Dentsu, and we arrived at a conclusion to go or not to go. So that gives you a direction on whether we go ahead with this or we don't. And once we decided based on that data that we will go ahead and our instinct added to it, then we set up Sakra World Hospital, which is the first joint venture hospital set up in India, anywhere I think in India. Yeah, that's the first Japanese collaboration, 50-50, and I was chairperson of that hospital for 2 years. And we we decided, it was very interesting. We studied all the different verticals, and we realized that cardiac is already a lot of competition with Dr. Devi Shetty, and he was located quite close to our hospital. So we said we will not focus on cardiac, but we have to also offer cardiac. If you don't offer cardiac to the standard that the market is used to, then your hospital will not get the necessary credibility. So your cardiac has to be strong, but that cannot be it can't be a cardiac hospital. It has to be seen as a multi-speciality, super speciality hospital, and we identified 2-3 verticals we felt were needed. You had to study the community around. There was a 2-kilometer community, 8-kilometer, 10-kilometer, 15-kilometer. So we studied all the catchments, and we did a psychographic study, we did a demographic study. All this I used my knowledge from the account planning of advertising, and that along with the medical team and along with the Japanese who themselves are proficient at setting up businesses, we sat together and we arrived at what are the specific verticals that the hospital will focus on, what will be the size of the hospital. Then we had the financials, our finance guys, their finance guys, all that. And of course we work on zero loan. So our finance people have a very comfortable time because there's no debt financing. Everything is through internal accruals, everything is through internal. So we don't have that interest burden as such. We don't have to worry about debt structuring and restructuring and bank engagement. So therefore we never really have a CFO. We have a nice strong chartered accountant, young guy who's got a senior person to sort of oversee him, and that's how the project report was made. The hospital was set up in 18 months from the date of execution, from the time we started excavation. So from the date of excavation to the date of the first procedure was 18 months. On an average, a 300-bed super speciality hospital with 14 operating theatres, state of the art, with state-of-the-art navigation software integrated, can take anything up to 3 to 4 years, as we have seen with competitive hospitals at that time. We studied what were the time. Now this all study part of it I was doing along with my team. I'm not as intelligent or knowledgeable or structured as you would be as a research scholar, but I knew what is to be done, whatever little I could do to structure it myself, and the rest I would delegate or recruit young researchers, and they would sit and work on this with me. So we did a chart as to what do competitive hospitals of this model, how long do they take? And we fed that back into the project report and the project finance, and we said we have to do it in this time. Now the big thing about working with the Japanese that I learned, and that I've just said in one of my talks recently, which has been published, which has gone into the net, they take a lot of time before they arrive at a conclusion. They don't rush into the conclusion. So we took about 6 to 8 months just to get the model right. We researched it at every step, we put our intuition, we used collective wisdom, we put in the best practices of both India and Japan, Kirloskar and Toyota, and we tried to arrive at a model that was perfect. And then we did the architecture and design of the hospital. All of you know that when you're designing a house or an office, till the last minute you're making changes. So what happens? Cost goes up and the time goes up. So here it may appear slow in the beginning, but because everything was planned meticulously to every detail, once the design was through, I said, now this is it. Here is the SOP. We did an inside-out design. So first we did the SOPs of the hospital. What are the important aspects that you have to bear in mind, and we had each medical department head whom we had already hired a year before to work part-time with us before they came full-time. They put down department-wise SOPs, and we based on the SOPs we briefed the architect. So the architect did an inside-out design, not the other way around. So based on the SOPs, we did the entire design of the hospital. So the SOP manual was finalized. it was documented. After that, based on that, the design was detailed right up to the MEP drawing. All the papers were put in front, finalized, signed, and then we told the doctors and we told ourselves, we will not speak to the contractor till the hospital is ready. So at one shot, patak, khatam. Otherwise, every day, you know, and we found this through our study of the competitive hospitals. We found that that is what was happening. That is what was happening. And they were and our cost was 25 to 30%. We were 1 crore per bed, 90 lakhs per bed cost, 300 beds overall. And the other hospitals competitive that we studied were ranging in the rate of 1.8 to 2 crores a bed for that, for the same thing. So, you know, it was almost half the price, and in certain cases, of course, they had cancer, etc., which we didn't have. So if you adjust all that, we were about 30-40%, 30% lower. And the other reason we were lower is there was complete transparency in the purchase. One big thing in the hospital is it's very capex heavy, land, building, and medical equipment. That really takes the wind out of your finance. And that's where you have to upfront put up. Gestation periods are large. Operating profit takes 4 to 5 years because you have to also function in a moral way in a hospital. It's not just about the business. It's not how many necks you've chopped, how many spines you've removed, and how many livers you've transplanted. I mean, you know, though some of our review meetings were a bit like that, you know. So how many knees and how many hips, you know, it would be less. But then, you know, then there's a conscience that comes in and you sit back, and of course there are quality sessions and all that we had. So it was very interesting. It was a great learning. But what that did was two things. It enabled me to use the business processes, the approach to business, the business acumen, the entrepreneurial energy, and having worked on a business, all that I could utilize and I could transfer it cross-industry, right? What I couldn't do was do a surgery. What I couldn't do was design an OT, operating theatre. I couldn't, the HEPA filters, for example, when they came to me with the specs, I was not equipped. So what do? I set a process by which the expert's input is automatically taken. But what I have to do is set that process and make sure the reviews are done correctly. So that whole format of managing the process has to be done by you because you're driving the project. So then you don't need to have specific domain knowledge. But what that helped me to do was very importantly, which I realized on November 29, 2023, 2022 actually, yeah, it's more than a year, was that when I was suddenly thrown into it, at least I had done two things by now. For 10 years, I had set up 2 small joint ventures with the Japanese, with the Toyota group. So they knew me as a business person. They knew me as a partner. They knew me as a person. All 3 things matter to the Japanese and to Toyota. That's very important for them, all 3. With almost equal weightages to all 3, to speak your language. But somewhere I have to sound a little intelligent. I'm, you know, sort of overwhelmed by facing brilliant young minds who work in a very structured and an organized manner. So to use your language, I had to put equal weightages almost for all the 3 factors. And at the end of it, it was very nice because in 2000, should I speak about that or you want to now ask questions?
No, please go on. We still have another 5 minutes.
Then
especially your experiences of dealing in a cross-cultural environment.
Yes. Yeah.
And especially the Japanese, out here we are trying to figure out why don't we see greater Japanese investments into India, and the cultural differences are actually the primary reason that are offered to us from research around, and many of us, including myself, are not so sure that that is actually the key reason. But you have dealt closely with them for many years, so perhaps that could be a good thing to start off. And then after that, we'll then start to take questions.
Yeah, sure.
and so on.
So very interesting. I will tell you about this. To fast forward to the current moment and to what we've done, it's almost 27 years that we have had 6 to 7 joint ventures with the Toyota group. And Toyota represents the best of Japan and the hardest and the most challenging of Japan, the toughest benchmark of Japan, right, to ally yourself to. There are many things. I find that there are a lot of similarities between the 2 cultures, and there are synergistic contradictions. So it's interesting. Now you have to identify those synergistic contradictions and make them work for you. So let me give you specific and simple examples. One, the most important thing when you deal with the Japanese in a work culture, the work culture is where there are synergistic contradictions. You know, they take time, they are researched, they're not slow, they just take time. They're researched and they arrive at very informed decisions with proper risk mitigation plans. We are entrepreneurial, we have energy, and we add a lot of intuition. At the end of the day, India is one of the top economies of the world today, right? Whatever it may be, however chaotic or messed up we might be, and we might want to self-analyze and self-criticize, but we are one of the top. And we are moving there. And I don't know how we are doing it, because I can't find a proper gardener, I can't get a cook. Really, I don't know where the employability is. I don't know. In manufacturing also they're having similar issues, huge issues in fact, for employability of technical. So that is an issue, but somehow we are getting there, right? So there is a synergistic contradiction if we can make it work. But certain factors are very critical for us to bear in mind in their work culture. First, very, very important thing is commitment. They are very particular that do not overcommit and underdeliver. It's okay if it's the other way around, but even that is not really good. They're saying commit and deliver to that, finished. So simple thing, if the meeting is at 11, if they come at 10:30, which they sometimes do because they must be on time, they will wait in the car outside till it's 5 to 11. So they won't walk in. Why? Because they feel it is disrespectful. So their definition of respect is very different. We also have this whole thing about respect, right? When somebody comes to your house or when you're engaging with somebody, we have been taught by our older generation across our socio-cultural systems that you have to show respect. And that respect comes with a little bit of a bent body, or a namaste or whatever it may be, greeting. So respect is common to both, but how you define respect is very different. We tend to commit because we are very enthused about making the other person understand and know that we're interested. And we think that is respect, but they don't find that as respect. Second very critical thing with the Japanese is to build respect. Now we have a 3 trillion yen target set by the government for exchange, and we still have a long way to go. The big bucks have yet to really come in, whether it's US or Japan. They're still trickling, they're still watching. So to accelerate that, if you understand the work culture, it's very critical. In fact, I don't know how a research model can interestingly be developed by CSEP towards something like this. It carries a lot of qualitative inputs and in the model, so I don't know how that works. But second is to build trust, and that takes a lot of time. Part of building trust is not overcommitting, under-delivering. Part of building trust is being there when a meeting is fixed, not cancelling, not postponing. Part of trust is also to be honest and transparent. If you don't know something, you say, I don't know it. So at a particular time in our joint venture, we didn't have the money to pay for the extra increase in shareholding that we wanted. We just didn't have the money. And we know that they won't be comfortable if we take back-end loans. We could have done that. They would never have known. We could have taken in intercorporate loans from other Kirloskar companies. We have relatives who've got cash, flow, and but we know they don't like it. We could have very easily done it. It was very easy. They would never have known. But we actually went and told them we have zero money to increase the shareholding by this percentage. They said, how long do you need to get that money? We said 2.5 to 3 years. So as part of the agreement, they built in a clause that whether 3 years or 5 years, whenever we have the money to take our shareholding back to that 11 or 15% level, it would be given to us at today's price, not 5 years later price. So it's not about money. It's not so measurable with them. It's really about trust. You have to build trust, and it takes a lot of time, and you have to be very careful. Even today now, after I've taken over my daughter and I from the husband, one of the most important things that we want to do, or we are trying to do, is to continue the trust and to build on that further, not just maintain it, but build further on it. So every little remark, every little comment, every little commitment has to be taken very carefully. I could not say to them, I want to go for a hike to Mount Fuji. I was discussing, and Tetsuro Toyoda was there, and he said, fine. I said, I was wondering if there's a good travel agent, because it's a bit scary to go to Japan alone hiking off in the mountains. I just said it, and then we had lunch and everybody forgot. 2 days later, whole detail came from the travel agent. All the details of the trek, the optional dates. I had happened to say April is good, so all the optional dates in April, what are the costings, how would I be received, how do I engage with the travel agent, form which I had to fill. And I said to Vikram, I have no intention of going. I said, I just said it, because, I get into that, that's a big problem with me. I get into the flavor of the moment, and then there's a subject being discussed, and I'm sort of, let's go, because I love hiking. So at that, we can discuss here about so many things. And
did you finally go?
No, I didn't.
You didn't.
I didn't go.
She has gone to the Everest Base Camp.
I've done the Everest Base Camp, I've done Kanchan.
Yeah.
No, I didn't go because there was something else happening that year, and then I'll go now if I have to. But I didn't go. And Vikram told me, he says, don't be casual. because you are asking them to help you with, and they will go back and they will spend time at the highest level, they will say, and then you'll say, I'm not going. So it just feels very casual, and the casualness, because it's a business relationships. Now, if you're friends with somebody from college, that's a different thing, right? Because the platform is different. So when you engage with them on a business relationship, then there's a lot at stake. There are many variables, and it's the variables that you have to manage, and it's the variables that you have to consolidate. So commitment, institutionalizing respect. We actually institutionalize respect. They've done that. It's not a one-off. It's a part of the institutional SOP. It works like that. It comes naturally. It just, the system drives it. Third is to build and maintain trust. Very, very important. The fourth, the two more things. Fourth, very critical, is humility. If a nail sticks out, they say you hammer it back. It's not about the individual. It's always about working in a team. It's always about building consensus, not commanding decision. It's always about building consensus up the layers, horizontally, vertically, in every way. That is why it takes time. But what is important is, my experience, it takes time, but like I said in the hospital, once you've taken a decision, the error margin is almost negligible, so execution is very swift. So what you've lost in the decision-making process, you gain in the execution process. It's before time and it's under cost at the end of the day, because it's so beautifully and perfectly processed. So that aspect of humility is very, very important. Ability to work in a team, not take credit. What they liked about Vikram and me, and they, you know, this may sound very small and stupid to you, because we are all used to very large gestures and very large actions that measurably demonstrate things like humility and respect, right? Like sweepingly touching the floor, or sort of wearing those clothes and, you know, jumping around. And it's not that, you know, there it is very different in humility. Vikram did the entire joint venture. I was back supporting him, of course. A lot of things both of us did together, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do that today. But he had his uncle and his brother, and he brought in the whole family when it came time to sign the JV. And when it was actually time to sign the joint venture, he stepped back and he put his brother and uncle in front. Dr. Toyoda never forgot that, you know. He said, this is the man I want as my partner. And he remembered it. So when our business, Kirloskar family had a business split 10 years ago, 2013, we had a business split. 2012, we had a split in the Kirloskar business. And now it was no longer a joint venture with the Kirloskar group. It was a joint venture with Vikram Kirloskar and family, only with one man and his wife and daughter. And imagine a several billion-dollar corporation that has done a joint venture as early as, look at these years now, 1995, is suddenly in 2012, we are going there after 5 joint ventures and 2 on the anvil, saying that you will have to just now be with me, because in the split, we've taken this part of the business. And it is that memory in Dr. Toyoda's mind that didn't leave him in any doubt, because he says, that's the man he said, even though there is a group and a family, my joint venture was with you, he told Vikram. It was never with the group or the family. And it was those traits he noticed, not going and sweepingly touching someone's feet, or, you know, moving to temple bells and sort of distributing prasad with older generation, 50 log. You know, it's not show. It's just a simple, and, you know, he did it genuinely. It's not that he was trying to impress them. He just stepped back and, you know, he just put them in front. It was a very simple thing.
So may I, on that note,
and there's one more point later.
Oh, so no, then go ahead, finish. So
he's not going to get a chance to talk.
So no, that's fine. I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's your turn to talk.
Okay.
One of the objectives of policy work is to translate the individual, the idiosyncrasies, into processes which the state and otherwise the larger ecosystem can take over. So any advice that you have for that? Because there clearly is a problem in this interaction that's happening.
So when you, so you're saying that how do we, when we develop a model for an India-Japan engagement?
That's correct.
From a research point of view?
Not just from a policy perspective.
From a policy perspective.
How would policy actually be able to reflect some of these individual or idiosyncratic aspects
government
of the
policy
Japanese?
you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. So government policy, first of all, that the policy you have to demonstrate at a government level that there's stability. Any kind of and it has to be standardized for all industries and for all countries. Now you can't say to a Japanese the policy of the policy cannot define or have room for deviation. If there are fluctuations and deviations in the structure of the policy, then that gives them a deep concern, and that's where they lose trust. The policy has to build in stability, and it has to prevent or disallow any variations based on individual entities from Japan. So you can't say Honda, I will treat this way, Toyota, I will treat this way. There has to be a standardized policy across all, very, very important. And second is the policy must build in the engagement model. That is very important. And the policy must define how the Indians and Japanese in business or in trade are going to engage with each other. What is the process they're going to use? How are they going to define timelines? That is very important. Without that, it was not going to work. If it's just going to be a policy with broad formulations, it won't work. The softer aspect has to be built in. And the standardization is very, very critical. And modification of flexibility, if there is, then there have to be written criteria. What is it going to be based on? It just can't be arbitrary. Sometimes that happens, Sometimes trade associations can negotiate with the government on a policy. And if you do that, then they feel very, very bitter about it. They're very uncomfortable if they see that.
Okay, so there was one more point that I got in the way. Yeah. No, so there was one more point that I held you back on.
Yeah.
So
no, that last point was patience.
Then we'll have questions.
No, the last was of course patience. You just can't lose patience with them. So that is another thing when you're dealing with the Japanese in business especially, or at a policy level or a government level. Even I'm saying, even when you're devising a policy platform between the two countries for trade or for whatever it might be, one is stability, one is if there are going to be variations, then you have to define those variables clearly, in what situation there'll be variables. Try and keep it as even and fair as much as possible. And the process of negotiation would be also built into the policy? How you're going to negotiate on the trade platforms and things like that? Is that part of?
Well, it can be, it need not be.
Yeah, so but I think that's also an important part of the discussion with them, when you talk to them with policy matters. Very important.
So we'll take questions now. Sandhya, you had one. I'll take 3 questions and then we'll do another round.
Another round of?
Questions.
Okay.
Anyone else? Sandhya, I saw a hand there. Karthik. Okay, Ria. So in that order.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kirloskar. That was very interesting. I'm actually tempted to ask you about the health industry, since you obviously have rich experience there, in terms of how you see the private industry engaging in a much more deeper manner with the government towards the goal of universal health coverage, which the government is quite focused on, because there are, as you would perhaps know better than me, many challenges currently. And especially in, let's say, tier 2, tier 3 cities, what is constraining more private industry from especially creating critical care? But that's what I'm tempted to ask. But let's put that aside, because I don't know how much time.
I'll tell you.
I have a totally different question, so you can answer whatever.
You can ask a question and say, no, I'm not asking.
No, I said if there's time. Lavish, I said if there's time.
No, she's
as
right.
A woman leader, as a woman leader, you've been in the professional world and risen, and you've been in a family professional environment and risen. What are your experiences as a woman? What were some of the challenges that you may have encountered, and it's fine if you didn't, and how you addressed them? Were there differences being a woman in a family business and a non-family professional environment? And do you see today's world is different from, let's say, when you started off?
Very important. I'll answer both. Very quickly on, just very simple in the healthcare, what we experienced, and the reason we in fact wanted to, I was very keen to step into tier 2, tier 3, and 4 years back, just before COVID, I became chairperson of the healthcare CSR committee of the government of Karnataka, and one of our objectives was to build primary health centers across tier 2, tier 3, even in the rural areas. So they don't have to go to the district level, they have a primary health center in their level. What we found when we did a survey again, is a lot of those PHCs in those smaller towns are running as warehouses, they're shut. No one's even gone there. So I told him, instead of setting up 500 more PHCs, let's first revive these PHCs, no? And there again, I said, let's use the private industry partnership. The big problem in trying to penetrate deeper and provide the universal healthcare that you're speaking of is talent. There is no skill set. We are short of nurses, we are short of paramedical staff, and we are certainly short of doctors. But paramedical and nurses is very, very poor. I don't know how many we are short to a bed. The ratio is amongst the lowest in the world. So unless we step up skilling across, whether it's manufacturing or healthcare, it's going to be, expansion, penetration is going to be very difficult. the living conditions in tier 2 and tier 3 towns, the overall economic boost to those towns, it'll happen. There's a natural cycle of how economies develop, so that'll happen. I'm sure it'll happen. When it happens, it becomes easier to at least contain the trained staff in those towns. Otherwise, they're not willing to work there. So if there might be brilliant prospects from these towns. There have to be nursing colleges in all these smaller towns, but they have to go there and live there and work there. And that's not happening. They're migrating to the cities and they're migrating to Middle East. So that is the biggest problem in penetration. And that will be addressed. I mean, there's a natural flow of the economy as it goes up, everything develops, this also develops, but I think more focused emphasis on skilling will be required. There are individual pockets of excellence in this being done by even companies like Bosch. They've trained a huge number of nurses in collaboration with Apollo, and then they give them out to various hospitals, especially government hospitals. But those are pockets of excellence. The multiplier effect is not there. That is one. To come to the second question, very specifically, yes. There is a difference in a woman managing, whether it's 10 years ago or 15 years now, 20 years later, whether it's in the US, in New York, or it is in Bangalore. There are certain things which continue, and I faced it. The first is the level of aggression, right? If a man is aggressive at work, his ambition is seen as a very positive attribute of his personality, and it is absorbed by society very easily as an extremely progressive, intelligent way of functioning. When a woman is aggressive in a physical context, talking a lot, running around, excited, talking shop, she's seen as, how should I say, diluting her femininity. She's seen as imposing. She's seen as a little over the top. She's seen as going that extra mile. It's not required. She's seen as someone who's continuously in a state of a lack of restraint. It's just a very subconscious, fleeting judgment of the other person, but it's there. It's there amongst women largely and amongst men also. There is some discomfort that immediately comes to the table. So one thing that I've learned to temper down over the years is my body language. I've learned to do it because you know why? I will never recommend, I'm not a rebel. I don't believe that in life you have to always fight and rebel and go for it and go your bra burning and go with slogans across. That doesn't help you. Fighting doesn't help you. Conflict doesn't solve problems in management and research in any field of life. So what I decided to do is, I decided certain things I will conform, and if I have to show my aggression, I don't need to show it. If I have to prove myself, let my work speak for itself, let my contribution speak for itself. All I have to temper is my approach. It doesn't matter. Because if you're confident, the most important is if you're confident that you got it right, you're willing, you can compete, you can work hard, and once you start showing results, then you don't need that aggression. You'll find that aggression, if it's tempered, it's fine. But then I have to be very careful, and I am careful, and I have been careful. What you see now is a 200% toned down version of 20 years back. I mean, Lavish wouldn't even be here if it was 20 years back. He'd be so sort of disengaged, he'd say, I'm not going to get a chance. So he'd already be sitting in the audience staring at it. So, the point I'm making is, in management also, or in anything that you do, you have to sometimes temper yourself. You have to look at the cultural environment around you, because finally, what is your end objective? To make it work, to succeed, right? Not to fight. Otherwise, the battle itself becomes an end objective. So there is no change, whether it was 10 years back or today, no change. Between professional and family setup, there is a little difference. And I know why you asked that question, because there is. I'm being very honest. I'm not speaking to the gallery, and you can quote me, because I have to be honest. So there is a big difference, little big. In a family business setup, the restraint requirements are much higher. In a professional setup that I was in, Interpublic Worldwide, or even with Toyota, you'll be surprised. On ideas, on your speed, on your ambition, you can be very, very expressive. You can be yourself. You can manage the situation, you can manage the department, you can manage your work in the manner that you believe that you should manage. But in a family-owned business, you have to be there, because you're also someone's wife. You're also someone's daughter-in-law, and you've got your brother-in-law sitting there, your grandfather-in-law, your uncle-in-law, your aunts at the back gossiping away, waiting. So it's very hard.
Hi.
So I'm going to collect these two questions and then we'll just take them.
So I often wonder, when someone's had a wide range of experience and they've worked for so many years, what is something you miss from an earlier time of working? Like, what is something you now are like, oh, I'm managing so many companies, but that time, I wish I could do that more?
Ria.
Thank you for that wonderful talk, ma'am. I was reading your profile this morning, and amongst the many hats that you've worn, you've also been the Honorary Consul to Finland. And congratulations on receiving the Knight First Class from the government. I wanted to ask you, among how did you translate your learnings from the industry into this sort of diplomatic role?
Okay, I'll take. So should I start with
Yeah.
Your question, let me recap, is what is it about the, let's say, a decade or two earlier when I was working to now, what is it that I wish I had started with or done then? Is that what?
What do you miss now doing from back then?
What I miss now doing from back then? Oh my God, what do I miss now doing back then? Mountaineering, golf, acting, so many things I'm not able to do now at all. You know, I'm a grandmother, so I have to behave like a grandmother. That's the biggest change, right? You have to, yeah, there are daughters-in-laws to be taken care of and behave in a certain way. You know, there's a lot of, let me tell you, there is a freewheeling body language, a freewheeling mind that you were in when you're, let's say, in your late 30s or early, and when you're entering 60. There is bound to be a change in the level of, how should I say, in the level of agility that you have mentally and physically. So, you know, that I wish I could bring back to some extent, but it's very hard. And it's the same with a company. A company is robust in a certain way after it's completed. Kirloskar Group is 180 years. So it can't have the agility and the freewheeling processes that it might have had when it was setting it up, or it was in the middle of the curve. When you peak and you flatten, it's different. You know, that it's more about sustainability, it's more about sustaining, it's more about standardizing, it's more about being temperate, because that is what you need when you handle scale and complexity. You can't be too freewheeling when you're handling scale and complexity. That is what I miss from 20 years back. I hope that answered you. Yeah, so Finland, you know, Finland happened to me. Some things happened to you, and I'm always happy to take on. So about 14 years ago, Finland was doing a book on women entrepreneurs in India, balancing it with similar stories in Finland, and they somehow found my name, and the ambassador was a lady, and she visited Bangalore, and we had a nice cup of tea, and then she said, about 2 months later, they wrote to me. They had me in that book, and they wrote to me saying that we don't have an official consulate in Bangalore, we want to set up an honorary consulate, and we'd like to know if you'd like to take this on. So it really meant, you know, it was very much in keeping with my skill set and my core competence of connecting people, connecting cultures, connecting businesses. You know, I was able to contribute both to the cultural connection and also the business connection, because I understood business, I'm doing business. So bringing the two countries together in the state of Karnataka for greater cooperation at a cultural level, we have a plan, we have a schedule and how we need to do it, and at a business level was very important. Plus I had the infrastructure to provide at an honorary level for the minimal kind of coordination work that may be required from a local consulate. So that is how it all came together. And it was very enjoyable because it was for me completely different. You know, sometimes you make identical pillars in an architecture of a hall, and one pillar needs to be very different. One pillar needs to be a mistake, because only then will you understand and realize the beauty of the other pillars. So sometimes you need to go from your basic platform, you need to disengage a bit and do something a little different. So the mountaineering is a part of it. It's all about Japan, so why not a bit about Finland? But the core strength that I'm applying there remains the same. I mean, if they would ask me if they were wanting to utilize my mind for doing structured research or project reports, I would have to say no, obviously. So.
3 more questions I'm going to take. Wow, there are 5.
Oh, it's doing
okay,
well.
It's doing well. Yeah.
They're not in a hurry to leave, at least.
Okay, so we're going to start from you, then you, Rajat, then Ganesh, and then Renu, and finally, yeah. So 5 questions I'm taking, and then we'll close this.
Hi, ma'am. So I see research as a very focused domain,
Right.
and communications as an all-encompassing domain. So how do you bring research and communications together, as in you have worked in advertising also, and you have had people who were researching for you also, and they were researching on particular topics. And I mean, if I make any sense there.
No, I think I get it. So when you're designing a research model, this is what we did in advertising also. When we briefed the quanti team, right? Quali and quanti we used to call it. When we briefed the quantitative research team, because we needed statistical analysis, we needed statistical insights, we always asked them first to sit with the brand management team to understand the psychographics of the consumer. Very, very important. You know, we said understand, because then only you can design your model. Keep the intangibles in your mind when you're designing the rational model for research. So that's what we did as far as advertising was concerned. I suppose to some extent you do concern yourself with the intangibles, with the variables, with the software aspects, and then you design your research model. Is that what you were asking, or no? No, tell me if there's something.
No, so what I meant to ask was that as a communications professional, we have to take care of all and different verticals or domains that are there, and we have to take care of the needs of the communications needs of all verticals or different verticals of research that are happening at an organization. So how do we do that? Because we don't know the core of all research verticals, and we have to devise strategies.
For example, give me an example.
For example, there's a climate change vertical.
Okay.
There's foreign policy, and I am a communications professional who has to take care of making sure that we are conveying to our readers or our audience the correct message that all these different kinds of researchers are doing.
You're talking about articulation of that research.
Yeah,
so
articulation.
That as a communication person, what you have to make sure, one is the wording. The context shouldn't get lost. So I have to do this a lot, you know, because very often when my research was, I had to present it back to the client. Now I'm not a domain expert of that subject, and there's a lot of data analyzed in that. What I looked at it and I said, what is the most effective way to make sure that he understands what I'm saying? So the most important thing is the flow has to be logical. And I found most times in a lot of those papers and presentations, the flow was not logical. And logic is something that as a communication expert without domain knowledge also, you know, A should lead to B, should just focus on that. Second is, make it as crisp as possible. Repetition is very hard to absorb. So even if it's a statistical analysis, and even if there's data that's being analyzed and different scenarios that are being presented, or a policy that's being formulated, you have to make sure it's very crisp and focused. And sometimes it runs in all directions. So you have to see when a person is receiving the communication, today it's an over-communicated world as it is. So how do you find a slot in it and make your impact and enter his mind and make the point? That is important. That a communication expert does. So logical flow, very precise, very focused, very crisp, as brief as possible in terms of the articulation. Avoid repetition, avoid long sentences. Japanese have a brilliant thing called visualization. They can take an entire company policy, HR policy, and put it on one A3 Excel sheet chart. It's called visualization. They just visualize the whole thing. Immediately you understand. So sometimes now I'm also doing it in my kitchen for the cook. I actually visualize the whole process and I put up the chart there with how much time it should take for each step. You see? Yeah. So articulation, try the visualization as much as possible. And that's not just charts and graphs. It can even be individual elements. Let me try and send you something. Let me send you.
Ganesh.
In a cookbook, yes. But they call it visualization. If you go to a pharmacy in Japan, it's all in Japanese. So I'm wondering, then when I see that, I see the steps, the visuals there, and I know what it is for and how to make it work. So without even the language, they've communicated a concept.
Hello, hi. Thanks so much for sharing your experiences. It's very interesting to learn about the Japanese culture and what Indian businesses have to do to kind of get more aligned with them to work better. So I have two tangentially related questions. First is on, do you think there are any learnings that the Japanese companies took from Indian businesses in reverse? And the other question is something to do with what you've written about and talked about in terms of Japan tapping into the demographic dividend in India. Is there something the government can do to better equip our young students, people in university? Is it something as specific as maybe learning the language, or is there something broader like a culture that they can get used to?
Very interesting, very important, and on the latter I'm personally very keen to work on. So I've started in a small way. So I'll come to it. Yes. So Japanese companies have also learnt, obviously, from India, you know, and the ones who've succeeded in India like Toyota learn, because again, it's part of their institutionalized process to also use local synergies and use local strengths to grow and diversify and to scale up. So they do that automatically. They grasp it automatically. I think one thing that they appreciate a lot about us is our instinct, because when we were choosing a CEO for one of the companies, we both had to bring in, everything is equal, you know, we bring in 2 people, they bring, then we shortlist one, it works like that. So when we were shortlisting, they said, you know, now we are confused, intuitively who do you think, what do you think? I said the one you've rejected actually, because I said he'll do very well, it's a startup and I just feel he'll do well, I can't explain. We took him and he did well, and the other day they made that point. Sometimes intuition goes wrong, we've gone wrong also with them. But the point is that they have understood that there is a very strong, because they are little robotic, quite honestly. They're a little robotic. My grandmother used to always say, my nani, you know, she was from UP, and she said, "Bilkul robots hai ye log." So they're a little like that. No? They can't, and that works. Robots with a heart, of course. So we have to be, you know, our intuition, also our ability to get things done against odds is something that they've understood is very strong in India. And the third thing is they're amazed how the poorest boy on the street lives on hope, how he can still, you know, sing and dance in the rain and just look happy, and they're appalled. So there is so much of depression in their society. You know, it's a very inclusive society. So they tend to, so this whole thing of being God-fearing, of understanding that you live on hope, that the millions in this country live on hope, and we just don't lose hope whatever happens. And under all odds, under all challenges, we are still able to deliver in that mad, unsynchronized, standardized method of working. There is still something works. And that is something they're picking up and they're trying to inculcate in themselves also. I find that change after COVID, you'll be surprised. You know, they're also closing in on deadlines. They've stepped up on aggression. They've stepped up on speed of response. So, you know, and they've stepped up on not enabling or allowing excuses to come in the way of perfection, because they're saying if you can do it against all odds, and you have to stay positive. So it's a lot of these things that after COVID I've noticed very strongly in them. Also maybe because of this China +1 strategy, maybe, you know, that's also maybe a reason, because now they need to have a manufacturing supply chain competitive from India, etc. So I think they're also realizing they have to work within our culture as well. What was the second one?
No, so we'll move on, because we have 3 more people and 5 more minutes.
Yeah.
So we'll collect the questions. Renu, Rajat, and there was someone else there.
I forget the second question sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you
I'll
for a
move
very.
it this time.
Thank you for your talk. It was very absorbing story. I have 2 questions, if you don't mind. One is, I am struck by the fact that Kirloskar has long been in manufacturing always, and it's moved into healthcare, which is a service sector, not manufacturing. In a sense, it's not surprising, because so many other conglomerates and corporates have done it. Reliance into retail, financial services, Piramal's from chemicals, pharmaceuticals into this, and so on. So what is it that prompted? I mean, obviously, it seems that the returns to investment in the services might be exceeding that in manufacturing. If you could shed some light on that. Second question is, you've spoken a lot about Japan, and it's all very admiring in general. You know, you pointed out a lot of positive traits and everything. But in a larger global context, we find there's a discernible lack and loss of competitiveness and decline of what were large giant Japanese firms. In the 80s, it was like Toshiba, all that. But they've been overtaken by Samsung and many of the others. Toyota itself, as a car manufacturer, has been, although it still has, I think,
it has the leadership.
No, I think Volkswagen is probably the largest selling, maybe, I don't know. But it's not had those kind of stellar technological breakthroughs. So what do you have to say on that?
I'll answer the second one first. No, I agree with you. But you know, the thing is, I think it's also a cycle that a country or a business category goes through. in many things, Toyota is still actually seen as the gold standard. I mean, if you look at durability, reliability, and standardization, then they are like really way ahead, and still looked upon globally. And I think in terms of numbers also, more or less, they are almost now number one with Volkswagen and others. Maybe certain categories they dominate. They're very different from the Koreans. So they are in for the long run, Toyota and companies. Second thing is, in Japan, there was a slide in the economy because they were very inclusive. You see, they never opened up to tourism. They never opened up to language. They never exported their culture. They never enabled migration. They were never allowed migration. They didn't open up to either the culture and the incoming or the outgoing. It was very inclusive. But just before COVID, when the problem with China started, I think they've woken up. It's been a bit of a awakening call to them to say, but even now, in spite of all that, US and Japan are still very engaged with China. I don't think it's very easy to shrug them off. We can all sit here and say that China +1, but China +1 is a very challenging +1. So they've realized that in the region, they need to have an option. They need to work with countries like India. They need to open up. So they are opening up considerably. And from what I am seeing in the engagement, both the diplomatic offices are now more centers of commerce than diplomacy. They're both trying to see how to engage beyond trade into business and how to enable it. So that answer, it also almost answers the other gentleman's question, where today certain engineering colleges that I'm getting letters from, Bangalore University has just started a Japanese language 1-year diploma class. And they're talking to the HR companies of all India-Japan joint ventures and Japanese companies in India to see if they can take them, train them, and then send them to Japan. Nurses. There's an institution in Hyderabad now where the Japan government is directly working with Hyderabad to bring in Japanese language and Japanese bedside management culture to the nurses there, and then they're going to take them and absorb them into their hospitals. This they've never done before. Because even when I set up the hospital 12, 14 years back, they were a no-no on sort of, our nurses from here. They said our bedside culture is very different, our nursing culture is very different, the care levels are very different, SOPs are very strict. So we'll put 2 of our Japanese head nurses, she will train, she will front, she will manage. But now it's changing. They've realized that, and they're becoming a lot more absorbent. And I can tell you one thing, when the larger companies, they will show the way. The SMEs, I had a group of 22 startups, young startups, children, boys and girls, 30% girls, 70% were boys, from an average age group of 26 to 42. That one guy was 42. And all of them are now visiting India for the 3rd time. They've learned, they were speaking very good English. Some of them have taken English lessons. And they've got in the university, they said they're introducing the language now. And they were here to see how the VC culture is prevalent in Bangalore and how is it developing, and whether they could get a partnership and do startups in Bangalore and in India, which was never there. The Japanese were always, like you said, out with the larger companies. But the SMEs form the backbone of the economy. If SMEs and startups don't engage and come out, then they're not going to grow their economy. So they're doing that gradually. They're setting there. There was a down wave. Their birth rate is very low. The marriage institution rate, that rate has dropped heavily because of cost of living. Inflation is very high. And they're very upset that the leaders of the government are not doing anything to incentivize a higher birth rate. Now they're going to push it right from there. They're starting. So I think after the war, they went up for a while, and then I think it just slipped into a kind of a slight depression, a curve that went down. But that's changing. That's changing. To see the quantifiable large-scale result of that change will, in my opinion, take about 5 to 8 years. But I'm very confident they'll get there with the experience that I have of their way of working as a country, as a nation, as a people, as a business. And we hope that the larger corporations will continue to lead so that they can show the way.
Thank you. Well, I'm
She
afraid
wanted to know why healthcare. Should I, in one sentence, tell her?
Please.
It was actually not Kirloskar's going into healthcare. It was our core competence in the business of project management that we brought to the table. It was Toyota Tsusho as a trading company wanting to do verticals like healthcare and food processing beyond automotive in any country. So healthcare delivery system and healthcare related services like housekeeping, laundry, etc. through the Japanese companies that are setting up here to service the hospitals, housekeeping and laundry requirements through those Japanese companies that they brought in, Japanese equipment, Toshiba that they brought in. And our job was really to put the whole management, project management in place, because Kirloskars are, we set factories. So we consider that to be one of our core competence.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to hold off the other questions. You can take them offline or right after this. So thank you very much. I think we all know that here is someone who brings together a very wide perspective and depth to the question that was asked. And you have a rare combination of both. It's quite apparent. And what I find most amazing is the importance to the tacit rules that you placed, that you've always placed. The qualitative aspects, which actually help bring things together. So, and the most important part is your humility. This is a very intelligent person. I don't think anyone
Very
could argue with
average,
that. So,
only in school and all, we had good marks after that.
that's okay.
There the marks were good, but otherwise.
Yeah, and you should know, and you must know that you have today opened many windows for us.
Thank you
So
so
with
much.
that, thank you so
No,
much.
but I'm really privileged. It's so nice to be here. Thank you very much. And thank you to CSEP. Thank you, Mr. Mohan. Thank you.
So, yeah, so now we have a shorter meeting after this.
Sure. And I have some stuff on manufacturing that might work with the lady. With him?